Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar discussing extreme drought in North Carolina. My name is Allison Whitaker. I am the Extension Associate at the State Climate Office, and I'll be moderating today. We expect our session to take about 50 minutes of content. We have a lot to deliver today, and then we'll move into some questions. If you have questions throughout the presentations, please use the Q&A button to type those questions in. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted afterwards. If you'd like to stay in touch with the North Carolina State Climate Office, please follow us on all of these different social media channels. We have a full agenda today. We're going to get started with the latest drought primer, including the drought's origins, impacts, and intensity. We'll move on to water resource perspectives, current water levels and water supply impacts, into forestry and wildfire perspectives, this fire season and the statewide burn ban. Then we'll move into current weather outlook, what to watch for this spring and beyond. We're going to wrap up the session today with the bottom line takeaways for you all, some additional resources, and take a couple questions for Q&A. So each of today's presenters represents their organization in the North Carolina Drought Management Advisory Council, or DMAC. By state law, the DMAC is responsible for making weekly drought assessments and providing input to the U.S. Drought Monitor. In addition to recent precipitation, the DMAC also reviews impacts to surface water conditions like stream flow, lake levels, groundwater conditions, wildfire activity, agricultural reports, and water supply restrictions. You'll hear about some of those impacts today. You should also know that the U.S. Drought Monitor authors have been upheld as North Carolina as a model for other states of our drought assessment process and our drought communications. So let's meet today's panel of expert presenters. Corey Davis is one of our assistant state climatologists at the North Carolina State Climate Office. He serves as our office's focal point for drought and fire weather and leads our science communication efforts through our climate blog, media requests, and presentations like this one. Klaus Alberton works for the North Carolina Division of Water Resources and is the chair of North Carolina Drought Management Advisory Council. He has been involved in North Carolina water resource assessment since 1999. Jamie Dunbar is the Fire Environment Staff Forester with the North Carolina Forest Service, part of this division's Forest Protection Section. His focus includes the National Fire Danger Rating System, the RAWS Weather Station Network, smoke management, and related training and decision support. Barrett Smith has been the Senior Service Hydrologist at the National Weather Service Forecast Office in Raleigh since 2019, where he focuses on working with water resource managers and other government partners in the utilization of National Weather Service precipitation forecast and flood watches and warnings. Since he began his career in the National Weather Service in 2006, Barrett has led or been involved with the advancement of flood and drought-related forecast and tools, development of water resource policy, and outreach to various National Weather Service partners and stakeholders. Okay, so to get us started, I'm going to hand it over to Corey Davis for our latest drought primer.
Yeah, thanks, Allison, and good morning, everybody. Again, we are pleased to be able to present this today. We know there's lots of questions about the drought right now, so we thought bringing together some of these experts to explain what's going on, how that process works in North Carolina to get to the weekly drought map, and a little bit about what to expect might be useful for everybody. So I wanted to start with where we are now. This is off the press this morning, the latest U.S. Drought Monitor map for North Carolina. Again, this was released earlier this morning. The data cutoff for the weekly maps is on Tuesday morning. That gives us as a state some time to process the data, to make our recommendations to the Drought Monitor, and for those national authors to put those pieces together and really paint this picture that we see every week. If you've been paying attention to the latest Drought Monitor maps week after week, then you may be able to pick out some of the changes that we see this week. We have seen more extreme drought, the D3 level, emerging across parts of western North Carolina, including in the Central Mountains and the southern foothills. Also this week, we are now seeing extreme drought spreading across the northern tier of counties, especially in the northern Piedmont, and also getting down into more of Wake County. So again, that is a trend we've been on over the last few weeks, more and more extreme drought showing up on the map. And we're seeing the same thing this week because, frankly, there was basically no rain over the last 7 days. So I think most folks understand what you're seeing in terms of the colors and the categories on this map, but this map may be telling us more than you actually realized. Again, first off, we know what the colors represent. Once we get to the orange color, that's the severe drought or D2 level. The red color is the extreme drought and D3 level. But what do these categories actually represent? Well, the U.S. Drought Monitor bases these categories on historical percentiles. That's a way that we can take very different data sets like precipitation totals, stream flow levels, wildfire activity, and really compare apples to apples. And the way we do that is by looking at how common or how rare those events are in the past. So once we start getting down to the driest 30% of cases, that's where we get into the abnormally dry level. The driest 20% of cases gets us to moderate drought, and so on. So you can see the extreme drought level that we're in right now is really between the second and fifth percentile. So instances that we see less than 5% of the time. We can also translate that to a rough frequency. So this is not exact. This is really just an average. So any given location at any given time of the year will expect to see extreme drought conditions between every 20 to 50 years. So again, that speaks to the rarity that we're looking at. This sort of drought has not been on the map in North Carolina in quite a while. In many areas, last saw extreme drought back in 2007 and 2008, which was almost 20 years ago. But also, we know that each of these categories tends to carry certain impacts. Again, these are not set in stone. These vary especially by time of year. We know during the wintertime, for instance, we don't see as many agricultural impacts or as many water supply impacts. But now that we are starting to get into the spring, into our warm season, these are the sorts of impacts we associate with each category. So you look up in parts of northeastern North Carolina, they are only, in quotes, in the moderate drought level, but that still means they are starting to see some crop stress and some low surface water levels. The severe drought level that's still pretty prevalent across the coastal plain and the central Piedmont means that it's been dry long enough that farmers are not going to see the yields that they expect if this dryness keeps up. We know a lot of farmers have struggled with their winter crops like the pastures and the wheat, and then they're struggling to get their spring crops planted. And also in the severe drought level, we tend to see wildfires that are larger and more difficult to control, and we'll hear more about that a little bit later. And then the extreme drought level that we're starting to get in across almost 40% of the state is where we do start to see water restrictions become more common. Again, at this point, that drought has been around long enough that it can start to take a toll on our water supplies. And that's also when we usually start seeing things like statewide burn bans, which we have been in for the last 3 weeks or so. Now, there is still one more category that's even worse than what we're in now. That is exceptional drought. That is reserved for the very rarest and the very driest events. And that's really the most dire situation. That's when farmers don't have enough hay to feed their cattle, so they might have to sell off part of their herd. That's when water supplies are critically low, and you'll see even more water restrictions implemented at even higher levels than what we're seeing right now in extreme drought. So I know for a lot of people, this drought seems like it is very sudden, like it's almost emerged overnight, just with the warm and dry weather that we've had this spring. But we know that this drought has been developing for more than 6 months now. We go back to last fall. That's when, especially in the eastern part of the state, things started drying out. It had been pretty wet through the summer, and then once we got to mid-August, really that faucet stopped. We weren't getting the regular rain events, and also we missed out on the tropical systems that we expect at that time of the year. So that's been one cause of this drought. Going into the wintertime, we saw about half of the state, mostly central eastern North Carolina, in the moderate drought level. And we knew going into the winter that it would probably be a drier than normal season overall. It definitely was. And after the winter was over in late February, we had actually gone down a level to severe drought across most of the state. And we were even seeing the first signs of extreme drought popping up in some areas. And we know so far this spring has also been very dry, especially in April. So that's why we've seen that expansion of extreme drought. So again, we didn't get here in 1 month or one event. This has really been a slow developing drought now over the past 6 to 8 months. So what's caused this drought to develop and to stick around and to intensify? Well, if you want to play the blame game with Mother Nature, you better have lots of fingers to point because there is not just one cause. Again, we trace this drought's origins back to the middle of last summer. We had Tropical Storm Chantal that moved through in early July, but after that, it was a pretty quiet hurricane season, especially right along our coastline. In the Atlantic, we went almost a month during the peak of the season in September without seeing any activity. And even after that, most of the storms really stayed out to sea, so we didn't see those tropical impacts and that tropical rainfall that we rely on as part of our annual totals. Once we moved into the winter, we knew that we were in a La Nina pattern. That's where we tend to have cooler water out across the Pacific, and this tends to have global impacts through its effects on the jet stream. So during a La Nina winter, the jet stream tends to weaken, it tends to shift to the north, and that also shifts the storm track to the north. So places like Michigan and along the Great Lakes, they see more rain and they are still in that wet pattern this spring, while to the south of there, we're usually warmer and definitely drier during those winter months. And then since we've come out of the winter, we had a few better rain events in February. Still not a lot of moisture with those systems. And especially since the middle of March, we have been in an almost summer-like weather pattern. We have had high pressure either just offshore or right over the Carolinas. That has put us in this sort of heat dome that, again, we usually expect to see in June or July and not in April. That's why we've seen record high temperatures over the last few weeks, and it has really blocked any sort of rain-making weather systems from moving through. So throughout this drought, since it started last summer, we've been tracking those precipitation deficits and how they've built up across the state. Every week, this is sort of like a horse race. On our state drought calls, we're always looking at which areas are the driest, which areas have seen a little bit of improvement, which areas are trending downward the fastest. You can see on this graph at the early part of this drought last summer, early in the fall, it was mainly those coastal areas like Greenville and Wilmington that were the driest. Those were the first spots that hit that 8 to 10 inch below normal threshold. They got a little bit better rainfall later in the fall, and that's when the rest of the state really started to catch up. We were seeing the majority of the state, but there was 8 to 10 inches below normal going into the winter time. Again, there were a few decent rain events late December, early January. We know we had that snow event in late January, early February, but it really didn't have much effect on the deficits. And that's because we measure those based on liquid totals. And even though we saw a foot of snow in some spots, that only amounted to about an inch of liquid, which is pretty much average per week at that time of the year. And again, we've seen some okay rain events in February, early March, but especially since that mid-March timeframe, the entire state has been in a dry pattern. We have been consistently trending downward with those deficits, and now we're starting to see a good chunk of the state that's more than 12 inches below normal. The driest spots like Boone are now getting close to 18 inches below normal. Keep in mind, this is only over a 6 to 8 month period, so that means these areas have missed out on about half of their normal rainfall just over that time. And that's a big reason why we're seeing that drought so severe right now. We can also look at what's happened just so far this calendar year in 2026. The background map here is showing the precipitation deficits. We see most of the state is at least 6 inches below normal, and we are starting to see pockets of southern and western North Carolina that are getting more than 8 inches below normal. Most of the state, including our long-term observing sites, are now in one of their top 10 driest starts to a year on record, and we're actually seeing a record dry start to the year in places like Raleigh, Charlotte, Monroe, and then up in Laurel Springs in the mountains. Keep in mind, these are all sites that have more than 80 years of historical observations. So when it's the driest on record over almost a 4 month period, that is really telling us something. This is an historic level of dryness that we're seeing at this point in the year. So on our weekly drought calls with the DMAC, we like to look at these deficits, but there's an even better way that we can look at that information. And that's by framing that in terms of those historical percentiles that the U.S. Drought Monitor is using. The way we can do that is through the Standardized Precipitation Index. This essentially takes the amount of precipitation or the deficits that we're seeing over a given time period and compares that with what's happened historically during that same time of the year. So the map you're seeing right here is a 90-day SPI. So this is going back to the middle of January, and we know that that lines up pretty well with the sort of impacts we're seeing now. It was really that lack of recharge in the mid to late winter, and then the dryness that we've seen so far this spring that is driving a lot of the main drought impacts, especially to our water levels. And what we see on that 90-day SPI map lines up very well with the current U.S. Drought Monitor map. We've got that extreme drought across the western part of the state and starting to emerge in the north central part of the state. Otherwise, a lot of severe drought, that D2 level, is present in the Piedmont and much of the coastal plains. So again, this is one of those indicators that we look at, not the only indicator, but this kind of helps us get a feel for, based on the data, what that drought depiction might look like. So keep this map in the back of your mind. We'll come back to it a little bit later. So I know now that we're at that extreme drought level, a lot of folks are starting to compare this to the 2007 event. Again, that's the last time most areas were in this bad of a drought, and that's also the worst drought our state has ever seen. It is really the benchmark for bad droughts. So definitely a lot of people who were around then will remember that and what we went through. The map here shows what the drought map looked like really at the peak of that drought, and that was very late in the year in 2007. We had been building up to this point with dry weather, especially that summer and that fall. And at this point in the year, a majority of the state was in exceptional drought, and a majority of residents across the state were under some degree of water restrictions. So again, it was pretty bad when we got to this point. So how does the current drought actually compare to 2007? So I want to talk about a similarity, but then also a few differences. One of the big similarities is just with the overall rainfall deficits that we're seeing right now. So how far below normal we've been over the course of this drought. So the graph here is for the Charlotte area. The brown line shows what our normal precipitation looks like throughout a year. Again, that's a pretty steady increase. In North Carolina, we tend to average roughly the same amount of rain in all months and all seasons, so we don't have a distinct wet or dry season on average. But we definitely did in 2007. The green line here shows how our rainfall accumulated that year. We started off the year, at least in the Charlotte area, with fairly normal precipitation. Once we got into May, though, that late spring period, the rain really leveled off. We were not seeing as much precipitation. We had some off and on events in June and the first part of July, but by midsummer, we were very dry and also very hot. This was the hottest August on record in North Carolina back in 2007. So, as you can imagine, very dry weather plus the heat was really driving a lot of those big drought impacts, including to our reservoir levels. We stayed dry that fall, not a lot of big rain events, including from any tropical systems. And you see, November also had very little rainfall. So that's why we ended up in that situation in December. And at that point, places like Charlotte were more than 17 inches below their average rainfall. So let's compare that to this drought. I'll cut to the chase here and say the overall deficits are pretty similar. Charlotte right now is a little over 15 inches below normal, but we are seeing places like Raleigh that have already passed their deficit from the 2007 drought. Raleigh at one point was about 13 inches below normal late in 2007. They're now more than 15 inches below normal in the current drought. So again, a comparable deficit. What is not comparable, though, is the time of the year when these droughts emerged. 2007 was very much a warm season drought, starting in the late spring and especially worsening over the summer. We know those are the times of year when evaporation is higher, when water demands are higher. So certainly that made those impacts in 2007 emerge faster and become even more severe. What we've seen in this case is that this has been, for the most part, a cool season drought. It started emerging late summer and especially over the fall. You see those prolonged dry periods that we had back in October, in November, through most of the wintertime. And of course, it's stayed dry so far this spring, but keep in mind, this dryness is happening at times of year when we don't rely on as much rainfall. The evaporation rates are lower because it's cooler. Water demands are lower because people aren't irrigating or washing their cars. So that's why, even though the deficits we're seeing now are similar, the impacts definitely are not. Another good way to illustrate that is by looking at one of the lakes in North Carolina, and that's Falls Lake, which is a major water supply for Raleigh and some surrounding areas. Just to give you a primer on what we're looking at here, I'll put a scale in the middle. This is showing the elevation of Falls Lake at the surface, and this is measured in terms of a height above sea level. So Falls Lake is not 251 feet deep, but the top of the surface of Falls Lake usually will come out to about 251 feet. Again, that's the target for this time of the year. Now, of course, it can get higher if we have a big rain event. They do have extra flood storage that's available, and it can go above that. And in times of drought, it'll drop below that. And that's what we're seeing right now. So as of this week, Falls Lake is running about 3 feet below its target level. And we're starting to see that there is exposed bank, exposed shoreline. Even out in some of the central parts of the lake, you're starting to see land that's rising above that water level. This picture is from almost 2 weeks ago, but even then we were starting to see, some of those sandy areas right along the edges of the lake. So I know it seems dry and it's been a while since we've seen Falls Lake get that low, but frankly, this is nothing compared to what we saw in 2007. During that event, at the peak of that drought, Falls Lake was almost 9 feet below its target level. It was more than 6 feet lower than where it's at now. And at that point, even across the main channel of the lake, there was really just a trickle of water coming through. So again, I know for folks it'll sound like that extreme drought level is on par with the 2007 event. Those rainfall deficits are getting close, but the impacts we're seeing to things like lake levels are not there yet, and hopefully won't get there during this event. So let's talk about some of the impacts that we are seeing and that most folks are starting to notice now. And one thing, especially if you're getting out in your garden or if you're a farmer preparing to plant your crops, is that you're probably noticing the soil moisture is very, very low right now. In a lot of cases, it has basically been reduced to dust. And you'll notice that if you see tractors driving through the fields, they're just kicking up those big dust clouds behind them. A little bit later, Barrett will talk more about some of the soil moisture at various depths, going all the way down to several feet deep. But I wanted to talk about the topsoil moisture and what it looks like at the moment. Our office and our EcoNet station network that runs across the state measures soil moisture at a depth of 20 centimeters. That's about 8 inches below the ground. So that's really right in the root zone, right in that layer of topsoil that most folks will see as they're planting. I'm showing a chart here from our Whiteville station in southeastern North Carolina. If you know about our soil types across the state, you know this is a fairly sandy soil in this region, so it's fairly responsive to rainfall, but it can also dry out pretty quickly. We've seen that over the last year, going back to last summer. Some of those pretty regular rain events in July and August caused those soil moisture conditions to really shoot up into the very wet range. But then, as we've gotten in some of the drier spells, including last fall, including in the first part of the winter, we've seen those soil moisture levels drop off as well. Now, this site did see a nice response to the snowmelt in early February and some of the other rain events that we've had since then. But really, since that last decent rain in the middle of March, that soil moisture has just fallen off. It has taken a nosedive. And frankly, this is the sort of drop off we would usually expect in the middle of summer if we were in several weeks of hot, dry weather. And of course, lately, we've been in several weeks of hot, dry weather. So right now at this station, based on those historical percentiles, it is at the D3 extreme drought level, getting close to the D4 level. What that tells us is that the soil moisture is not in any shape for planting right now. There's just no moisture there, especially in the upper layers of the soil. And even if we were to get some decent rainfall over the next week, that does not necessarily mean it's time to start planting. The issue then is that even if there's moisture in the upper layers of the soil, anything that's planted will establish a very shallow root system. And if this drought continues, or if we get into some hot weather this summer, those shallow roots will dry out very easily, and that can kill the plant. So again, we would like to wait until we have some more thorough rainfall to saturate the full depth of the soil before we're really safe to start that planting for the season. Let's talk about some other impacts that folks may be noticing, and I'll note that all of these have been submitted by CoCoRaHS observers across the state. This is a citizen science program that encourages people to make daily rainfall measurements and about once a week to submit condition monitoring reports that talk about the sort of dryness or impacts that they're seeing around their home or in their neighborhood or in their community. So just over the last week, we've seen some good, really descriptive reports from all across the state. Last Saturday, an observer out in Buncombe County mentioned that even in the shade, they were seeing plants were wilting. The streams and creeks there had all gotten very low. On Sunday in Durham County, a very similar report. The lawns and their garden plants were starting to slow down. They weren't growing as fast. And especially those plants that they might have transplanted this spring were needing to be watered very frequently. To the south, down in Hoke County in the Sandhills, they are seeing the grass turning brown because it's so dry. And this is a hay farmer, so they're saying that that first cutting of hay usually happens in the month of May. That may be delayed or may just not happen because those hay crops did not grow like they should over the winter time. And then finally, a really interesting report from the northeastern part of the state. Keep in mind, this is that area that's only in moderate drought, so they have had a little bit better rainfall. The farmers there were at least able to get the corn in the fields, and the corn has started to sprout. But the problem there is that a lot of those farmers will pull water directly from the Albemarle Sound where it meets the Roanoke River and use that to irrigate their farms. Now, typically in the upper levels of the sound there, you're getting enough fresh water that's being flushed down the river that it's not too much of a worry about saltiness. But lately, because of the drought, you're not getting that water down the river. You're getting that salty water that's pushing further inland, and it's just too salty now for them to use for irrigation. So again, that's a very unique impact that we'll see in that corner of the state during times of extreme drought like this one. So let's summarize with a couple frequently asked questions that I know folks have on their mind. First off, what caused this drought? Well, like we talked about, it's not just one thing. It's a combination of these large-scale weather patterns that have set up since last summer and really haven't given us a break from the dry weather since then. What does that extreme drought, that red color on the map, mean for us? Well, I'll try not to get my tongue too twisted by this, but it means that our dryness is entrenched, intense, and impactful. It has stuck around for a while. It is at historic levels for this time of the year, and we are starting to see those impacts, including water restrictions, taking effect. And is this an historic level of dryness? Well, it is in some areas and for this time of the year. It is rare to see extreme drought emerging in the spring season. And again, we know that's because we've been building up these rainfall deficits and this dryness all throughout our cool season months. That is the big difference between now and 2007. And finally, will it affect me? And for a lot of folks, it already has. If you're in one of the areas like Charlotte or Raleigh that has begun to recommend water conservation or implement restrictions, then you're already being affected by that. In other areas, as this drought stretches on, you almost certainly will feel impacts at some point, whether that's a brown lawn, whether that's a garden that's not doing so great this season, or whether that is water supply impacts and restrictions. So I'll talk more a little bit later about some wrap-ups and takeaways from this drought. For now, I will pass it over to Klaus from the DMAC for some water resource perspectives.
Okay, thanks, Corey. Let me share my screen. All right, you see that?
Yes.
All right, great. Yeah, so Corey gave a great summary of how we got to where we are. I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means as far as impacts this time of year. As Allison mentioned, I chair the DMAC, so I call the meeting together each week, and we have the different agencies and groups report on what we're seeing and come up with a consensus. As Corey mentioned, every drought is different. This year, we do have some record deficits, but since it occurred over the winter time, conditions and impacts so far have been pretty low, which is good news. Bad news is, we've got the whole summer to look forward to. So if we don't start getting rainfall, we're going to quickly get into the same sort of impacts we saw back in 2007. So I'm going to talk about stream and groundwater levels, reservoir conditions, agriculture, and then water conservation measures. So this is a map of the real-time flows measured by the USGS at their gauges. The light red are actually record low stream flows for that day in time. So you can see just, the majority of stations are actually at record lows, for April. And then the little darker reds are below the 5th percentile. Typically, if we see those, we're starting to get worried. So the fact that, those are, in a way, the better conditions is really concerning. But again, because of the time of year, we didn't see impacts from those low stream flows for the most part. But now that we're getting into spring, we're going to start seeing issues with, ecosystems are going to start struggling. Inflows to reservoirs are going to be low. And, any sort of recreation on rivers and streams is going to be severely impacted. Another interesting map of stream flows that the USGS just put out. After the webinar, you can Google river drought and it gives a really interesting snapshot. Typically these different dots would have different colors, going from light tan to dark, because of the fact that all the stations, across the state are in that below the 25th and probably below the 5th percentile. It all, for the most part, looks the same, but you can click on one of the stations and it'll give some really interesting statistics. So I clicked on a station on the Tar River, and it shows you, going back to the beginning of the year, what the stream flows looked like, where we are as far as, moderate, severe, extreme, low flows, and then a forecast of where expectations are about where stream flows are going to probably, based on statistics, head for the next 3 months. And then the statistics, it says, it's been in stream flow drought for 46 days, and extreme stream flow began 27 days ago. And I looked at, looking at the entire state, 91% of our gauges are in the below the fifth percentile. So concerning flows. And then Division of Water Resources has a number of wells across the state that looks at shallow groundwater. So seeing how those groundwater levels are responding to the drought. And these pinks, which we don't like to see, those are new minimums for this April. So quite a few of those, and a number of others that are below the 2%, and a few others below the fifth percentile. So really pretty widespread impacts on groundwater. If residents have private wells and those are tapped into shallower groundwaters, they're going to start to see impacts to their wells. They may see them operating sporadically, or in some cases, not operating at all. And the groundwater gives a good indication of, kind of the more extreme droughts. Surface water can fluctuate rapidly if you get a rainfall. Groundwater is much more stable. And so when we start to see these low groundwater levels, that means we can really expect to see kind of widespread impacts to water resources across the state. We also look at the reservoirs. And so this is a summary of the Army Corps of Engineers statistics as of this week. As of interest, inflows to Falls Lake last week was 1% of the median. So as Corey mentioned, we have more demand on the reservoirs. Things are warming up, and we have also, higher evaporation. And when you have inflows that are below or well below the median, it's not surprising that we'll start to see levels in the reservoirs drop fairly quickly. Falls is probably the worst case right now for the Army Corps of Engineers. Its water quality pool, the amount that they have, allocated for water quality, has fallen below 60%. And when that happens, they start to release a lower amount from the dam. Now, each of the major reservoirs within the state has an operating guideline, and so they have to balance, needs of what is, in the reservoir and also what is being released. So those guidelines do protect what is being released and what's, downstream. So they're not allowed to go below a certain amount, as far as the releases go, so that, downstream users and water quality downstream is protected. But again, we're seeing releases will decrease. They'll still be protective of downstream uses, but releases from falls are going to begin to drop. And then also the water supply pool is at 82% now, which if you live in Raleigh, you know that you've got conservation warnings as of this week, when the water supply pool in Falls Reservoir drops below 85%, then Raleigh and other municipalities which get water from Falls Lake will go into stage one voluntary conservation. Uh, it's notable, Jordan has a much bigger watershed, and they've been able to hold back water. So they're still at their guide, but that's going to drop also in the next few weeks if we don't get significant rainfall. In general, considering how significant our deficit has been, reservoirs are in generally fairly good shape for now. I'll go to, so we also, looking at Duke Energy, they obviously operate a number of reservoirs across the state. Catawba Watery went into level one low inflow protocol for them this week. And it's similar to, what you're seeing for Falls Lake. They're going to request that any municipalities or utilities that get water from the Catawba Watery chain uh, go into voluntary conservation measures, and also that they will start to release less water if needed. And then if things continue to get worse, they may have restrictions on recreational leases and hydropower. And then Cube Hydro manages High Rock, Tuckertown, and Baden. They've been operating on minimum releases and will continue to do so. And finally, TVA in the western part of the state had been in good shape through March and April, but are quickly dropping. They're now at their system minimum operating guide. I know Fontana, I think, is 7 feet below normal. So they're going to start to see restrictions on how much they're releasing. And then I mentioned conservation measures. The state requires any utility that's in a area that's in extreme or exceptional drought to report their conservation status. And so this is a snapshot of just the first part of that web page that you can go to see, what areas are in, what level of conservation. And then talking quickly about agriculture, uh, looking at topsoil moisture, Corey touched on it. Over 90% of the state is now considered to be short or very short as far as topsoil moisture. Obviously, it's a critical time of year for agriculture. They want to, put seed in the ground, but if you don't have enough topsoil moisture, the seed's just not going to germinate. If it does germinate, those seedlings are not going to grow. So I know ag has really been looking at, have been waiting to put seed in the ground as long as it can. But I think we're getting to a critical point of the year where either they're not going to seed something, I think corn maybe at the end of its window of when they can plant it. They may switch to something like soybeans or may not plant at all if the forecast just doesn't look like they're going to really, have any sort of yield for what they're spending to put into the ground. So agriculture is seeing impacts already. I've heard about pastures are in terrible shape. Some farmers are starting to feed hay already at this time of year, which is definitely bad news. And then just to talk about conservation a little bit, uh, utility website is the best place to look for conservation level if you get your water from a utility. Uh, if you're on a private well, you maintain your own water system, and you can water as needed. But if you're in a municipality or serviced by a utility, the website is going to tell you what level the utility is at. typically the conservation measures go from voluntary to a couple levels of mandatory and then rationing. And different utilities in an area can have different triggers. An example is Raleigh and Cary Apex. Raleigh gets water from Falls Lake, which is in starting to get into concerning levels. Cary Apex gets their water from Jordan Lake, which is still in good shape. So you may see that people are watering or non-conservation in Cary Apex yet, but they are in Raleigh. And that's just because of their sources and what their triggers are about when they need to go into different levels of conservation. Uh, Common guidelines for conservation, limit your outdoor watering to a couple days a week. If you can, hand water instead of using a sprinkler. It's better to water heavier once a week versus lighter twice a week, and try and water before 10 a.m. This results in less evaporation and reduces grass diseases. Don't wash off driveways and sidewalks. Repair leaking faucets, and run of full loads of dishwashers and washing machines. So those are just some conscientious ways to cut back on water use. And that is all I have, and we can probably get some questions at the end. Is Jamie up next?
Hey, I'll go ahead and take over the screen if you like.
Okay, we can see your screen.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Again, Jamie Dunbar, Fire Environment Staff Forester with the North Carolina Forest Service. So my slides today will talk about sort of the forestry sector of impacts related to the drought, our fire load that we've been seeing, the burn ban, and those sorts of things. And I'll plow through a lot of these slides pretty quick, just so there can be questions at the end and so forth. Just to let you know sort of how our agency is organized real quick, there's three regions. There's a coastal region, Piedmont, and mountain region. And then there's 13 districts. And in nearly every county, there's an office or at least a satellite office where county rangers, assistant county rangers, forest fire equipment operators, and so forth work. So that's sort of how we're organized. And that's how some of the fire danger stuff I'm talking about is going to come out as we go through this presentation. Okay, so statewide wildfire context, don't get lost in all the numbers. I just wanted to have this up here so you could look at it, after the presentation. These are all preliminary. These are coming from our sort of dispatch database system. A lot of fire still has to go through the entire system with good measurements and cleanup and law enforcement and stuff like that. So anyway, don't get lost on the minute details here. The point is, basically as early as December, we started picking up an abnormal load of wildfires. Thankfully the temperatures, precip, and whatnot, uh, we were able to catch most of those fires small. Initial attack was successful. Going in January, the same deal. The 10-year average for January was around 339 fires. We went over 1,000 incidents in January across the state. February, we saw a similar thing where more incidents. Acreage was a little bit less, but that was because we had just enough precip events to sort of tamp things down ever so slightly, where we were still able to catch fires generally small, with quick initial attack. March, we saw the increase of fire as well as fire size. That's because trees are waking up, evapotranspiration starting, green up is starting. It's overlapping much warmer conditions, but dry air coming out of the northwest and so forth. So we've seen above average activity ever since really December, to be quite honest. Some of the larger fires we've had year to date, the East Tower fire, that's in Dare County, this black dot right here, that was 1,400 acres. That was in March. The Rosendale Road fire in District 8, which is the Wilmington District in Bladen County, they're actually still working that fire today because of the drought impacts to the fuels out there. 2026 year to date. Again, just taking a look at the dots, I wanted to show you sort of the fire distribution that we handle, with the Forest Services and agency. The light blue dots are, anywhere from a tenth of an acre, like a road shoulder that's hit very quickly, all the way up to about 10 acres in size. And the color coding for the dots go up from there. So how do we compare it? I wanted to look at the data from January to April and compare very quickly between 2000 and 2026. So how does this year fall out compared to previous years for state reported fires? There's a seasonality to it. The mountains in particular, the mountain region has a bimodal fire season. You've got a distinct spring season and you have a distinct fall season with the hardwoods. The Piedmont's sort of a transition between the two, especially with the sandhills. And then the coastal plain has a very pronounced spring fire season. And if we get into drought as we're speeding towards, more enhancement, very easily could have a late spring and summer fire season in the coast. So, 2026 so far is well above normal, like I've already been talking about. 2025 ended up for around 4,000 incidents, somewhere around 27,000 acres, give or take. And you can see the drought years, at least in the spring. 2023 was a big year where the fire count was down, but the fire acres was very significant. That was the fire load that we had in the coastal plain. So, like I say, each year has its own flavor, but this year, as Corey and Klaus and others have talked about, we're definitely seeing the impact of drought. So Helene fuels, that's another outlier in the entire system here with the forest. These are images that I took back in January. This is Dobson Knob in Burke County. Yeah, just showing you the fuel loading and what the forest landscape looks like. This was a closed canopy forest, right? So this is, supposed to green up and it's supposed to block sunlight and block wind, but this canopy's open now. So these Helene fuel areas are going to be outliers and anomalies for quite some time. These links here are really interesting. If you after the presentation, click around and look. This is just one instance. Another one in Yancey County. This is near one of our Ross stations, and the leaf material still attached from where the tree fell down during the hurricane. And then the fuel accumulations around build up areas or home sites, it's still there in a lot of cases and is still curing, right? So these are significant. Let's look at greenness. We look at green, and we see green grass outside, the leaf cover, leaf canopy coming along, and but that's you got to take that with a grain of salt right now in the drought. These green vegetative fraction colors that you see on the map here, the dark greens, that's not really representative of effective green as we call it in forestry. Is that gonna halt the fire spread, or is it going to contribute, or what is it exactly going to do in the landscape? So these hardwood forests here in the western Piedmont, going into the lower mountains elevations, you definitely see the added greenness. Sort of a compounding factor for us this spring. We've had really abnormal cold spells, hot spells, alignment of super dry air with both, and you can see we're only around 30, maybe 40% green fraction for a lot of the higher elevation mountains. And some of that has to do with the lean, but a lot of it, has to do with this cold temperature sort of stalling things out. Where do we stand, compared to last year this time? So somewhere between, maybe 10% greener than we were last year. This was on the 22nd. There's areas that are more normal, areas that are less. Some of that may be agricultural related, with disking, preparation of land. Some of it may be drought related as well. Keach Byram Drought Index. This is one of those factors that we look at heavily in forestry, but you've got to interpret and understand how the model works. So, right now you can see the blob of reds and oranges and whatnot throughout the Piedmont, especially in Stanley and Anson County, those areas and parts of our coastal plain. But don't discount those areas to the west and the east, because in the wintertime, we had just enough rain for the model to respond and drop those numbers down significantly. And then they don't rebound very fast at all in the wintertime. You may only gain a point or two a day, where in the growing season, you're easily, gaining 12 to maybe 15 points a day. So, but the point being, these red areas and orange areas were never theoretically washed out, over the winter. And, it's very significant throughout, but especially in these areas. This forest dry map, drought response index map, I think is really interesting. This is a national product that's put out. And you can see in North Carolina, there's a wide expanse of areas that fall in moderate to severe, if not even little pockets of extreme. And this is interesting for forestry because it's looking at 12 different environmental factors, and, from a short term sort of SPI that Corey talked about, all the way to 60 months out. So it just gives you sort of the flavor of what's going on in the forest for North Carolina and throughout the Southeast. Significant wildfire potential outlook. This was produced by the Predictive Services with the National Interagency Fire Center. They're updated once a month for the next 4 months. These four graphics came from the April 1st release. So you see April for us, for majority of the Southeast, significant wildfire potential was well above and is well above normal. It's related to the drought, the La Nina impacts, throughout the winter, and the fuel availability that we've got. So, May, if the models work out as it was, at the early part of this month, may see a transition of back to normal, for majority of the state, and then enhanced or that red above for the coastal plain. June, again, it's the coastal plain that falls into the bullseye, and July, the same sort of deal. And this is based on some climatology and patterns that the NIST meteorologists are looking at. But again, this is all subject to change. If we stay dry and we keep missing rain, that red extension will easily, extend into more North Carolina for May. And it's not talking about initial attack fires with a brush truck and a tractor plow response. These significant fires are the type that are incident management team managed, super complex, big lifts. Um, and fuels and fire behavior advisory. This was actually created and released on the 16th. These are very rare. These are like the tornado warnings, if you will, of wildland fire. These fuel and fire behavior advisories are such that they're warning firefighters on the ground right now, and then people coming in. The fuels aren't acting as they normally would. Fire behavior is more significant, and things to watch out. This is just an indicator of what we got going on. What have we, here's some examples from our mountain region, just a few photos, and we'll quickly go through these. What is it showing? It's showing duff consumption, pretty significant duff consumption. This is up in our District 1 and District 2 areas up in the central and in Northwest Mountains. So this requires a lot of heavy initial attack, a lot of extra mop-up work. It can take days, especially if water is scarce. The green is burning. Some of these fires, like in this example, you've got a running fire underneath basically closed canopy hardwood. That's because the fuels, the dead fuels, are so dry, and the moisture content of some of these live fuels are very dry because of the lack of rain. Extended burning periods as well. You see this bulldozer working late at night, and active fire behavior. In our region too, our Piedmont region, same sort of deal. These photos are showing active fire. Long range, moderate spotting, longer burn periods, rapid rates of spread, and so forth. And one of the most concerning factors of this, if you look at the picture on the bottom left, this was a wildfire, and it burned through. It killed a lot of the needles in the overstory. It takes time for those needles to fully cure out and senesce and fall off the tree. So now you've got a carpet of prime fuel ready to reburn, and this is what we're having to watch out for all across the Southeast U.S. right now. It's taking up a lot of time to mop up and keep reburn from happening, and then deal with it when it does. This is an example of Tuesday afternoon satellite heat detects in Georgia and Florida. You can see the significant fires that blew up that afternoon. You've got the Highway 82 fire as an example, and the Pineland Road fire, and they're in a earlier green up period based on their latitude. Plus, they were more entrenched in drought than we were. But it's just an indicator for all of the coastal and really Piedmont, southeast of what may lay in store if we don't see some improvement with drought. So anyway, the burn ban, just very quickly. It was instituted on the 28th at 6 p.m. by the Commissioner of Agriculture, and it's North Carolina Forest Service jurisdiction only. Why was it put in effect? Hazardous forest fire conditions leading up to and continuing ever since, and we sort of talked about that earlier. Put it in context, almost 18,000 online burn permits were canceled when the ban was enacted. So that sort of shows you the fire load. Remember that approximately 50% of the wildfires in North Carolina and really in the Southeast, most are about 45% are caused by debris burn escapes. So you trying to work through that. Although the ban doesn't prevent wildfire, it definitely reduces the number of new ignitions. So it helps us, put more local resources on the fires that have to be mopped up more with more difficulty to control, and it allows our firefighters to be able to move around more effectively, around the state. So other ignition sources are still there: equipment use, automobile exhaust, structure fires, discarded smoking materials, lightning, which we haven't seen a lot of yet, but I believe it's coming with our lightning season. And then Southeast wide resource availability is becoming scarce as more and more fire is developing across the landscape. And lifting of the burn ban management, looks at it all the time. It's going to depend on a number of factors, and it's really all driven by the drought's impact on wildland fuels. The point, being a quarter-inch or half-inch rainfall, it'll help momentarily, but it's not going to do anything to reduce the evaporative demand of the forest, of those super dry dead fuels and so forth. And just overall, just sort of tying everything up, that burn ban and minimal lightning activity is helping. It's really helping greatly limit the new starts. We're seeing like South Carolina right now has quite a few air quality alerts going on. This is from airshed impacts from the smoke in Georgia and part of Florida moving up along the southeast seaboard. We've got about 70 out of state resources that are helping us right now in the state, along with an INT3 that's managing those. So we just can't say enough. Many thanks to our local and state federal partners that are all working together as this fire load continues to increase. We're looking at the large fire potential moving generally, the general transition from west to east the next few weeks, especially if we start getting thunderstorms and lightning holdover risk. And I think those fires I mentioned earlier from southeast Georgia are indicators of what the building drought's doing and that level of fuel volatility that's all across the southeast U.S. coast. So, we're still 12 to 16 inches behind at a 12-month time scale for a good chunk of the state. So that's end of report for me. I appreciate your time.
Thanks so much, Jamie. I just want to note, everyone, we are on track to run over a little bit. We are recording this session, so if you're not able to stay on, if you have to drop off at noon, you can catch that recording on our climate blog. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Barrett for his presentation.
All right. Thank you, Allison. Thanks to the previous presenters and to you guys for putting this on. I'm happy to be here. I'll try not to go too long with the weather, but I know there's a lot of interest in what's actually going to occur in the next several weeks and months. And so do want to spend some time on that. I'm going to run through the 7-day forecast because there's some good news there. And then we'll look more towards May in the summer. And then finally, kind of the second half of the year. And there's some so-so news, I think, in terms of what we know at the moment for that time frame. So I won't dig into this too much, but these are just your weather maps for the next several days headed towards the middle of next week. Corey mentioned earlier that we've been in this kind of summer-like pattern with the heat dome. The pattern has shifted. And the good news is, if you look at each of these maps, there is a frontal zone in the vicinity of the southeastern U.S. almost every single day. We've got this kind of quasi-stationary frontal zone that'll be here, and so we've got some chances of rain. That's the good news from our weather maps looking forward. Our rainfall for the next 7 days, again, it's good to see some greens and blues across North Carolina. That's been lacking for the past several weeks. You can see here that the best chances of significant rainfall are across the deep south and the mid and lower Mississippi River Valley regions, with lesser amounts across the Carolinas. If we zoom in, you can see here that we have anywhere from about 1/2 of an inch to maybe up to an inch in some places in portions of the coastal plain and the foothills. There's lesser amounts in the Piedmont there where you're talking less than half of an inch in the next 7 days. The southern mountains do stand the chance of getting some good rainfall down there. The topography helps out in these situations for them to get better rainfall with the 2 to 3 inches possible in the next 7 days down there. So again, there is still a shadow east of the mountains. So good news that we've got a couple chances for rain on Sunday and I think Tuesday, and then some additional chances after that. We would like to see some of that accumulate. We also look at, when we get together each week, the percent of normal. So while the map may look green, blue, rainy, however you want to look at it, percent of normal rainfall, though, however, is below normal for much of the Piedmont and significantly below normal in some of the border areas, the areas where the D3 was just expanded. So again, good to get some rainfall. That will help, but we're still looking at below normal rainfall in the next several days. Looking ahead, and so this covers more like the middle to late next week. This is our 6 to 10 day outlooks for temperature and for rainfall. And these are just probabilities of above or below normal temperature and precipitation. They don't tell us anything about the amounts or when they're going to occur. But you can see here below normal temperatures across the northern U.S., above normal temperatures across the southern U.S. are favored. That puts us in the middle in that frontal zone I mentioned. And so you can see on the right, above normal precipitation is favored for a lot of the southern 2/3 of the United States. But I do want to point out, again, these are just probabilities. And so the area across North Carolina is in what we have is a 33 to 40% of a chance of above normal precipitation. That also means that there is, upwards of 60% chance of just normal or below. So while, again, the map looks green, that looks good, there's still a chance that we could see just normal or even below in that time frame late next week into early next weekend. The picture on the bottom right is small. I don't want to get into the details of that, but that is an accumulation of rainfall over the next 6 to 10 days. The point there is there are some of our ensemble models. These are all different models starting to show the yellows, which are 1 inch or greater, accumulate. So there is the potential that we could see some normal to above normal rainfall. It's just another way of looking at that. At the same time, there are a lot of members of those ensembles showing below normal rainfall or less than 1 inch in that same time frame. So good that we're going to get some precipitation. Still a lot of uncertainty as to how much we will get in that time frame. You want to look out towards the beginning of May, and you see below normal temperatures, which is good news for the drought, favored across a good portion of the Midwest and Northeast U.S., and above normal precipitation favored across kind of the Tennessee, North Carolina strip there. Again, those are low end probabilities of above normal, but it is still a signal that we could get at least normal in that time frame as well. So teased May there. If you want to look into May and a little bit further out, we get into the summer time frame. I think the next 30 days are really critical for us in terms of how much rainfall we get and how it impacts the drought, because as we head towards June, July, and August, we become much more dependent on afternoon showers and thunderstorms a lot of the times. That may help an individual community, farm, city, reservoir, but not the entire state a lot of times. And so you get into the May timeframe, we've got equal chances of below or above normal precipitation with above normal temperatures favored across the southern U.S. And similarly, as you head out into the summer timeframe, above normal temperatures strongly favored across portions of the southeastern U.S., equal chances or maybe a slight lean towards above normal precipitation across the Carolinas. Again, not a strong signal there one way or the other. All right, what do we know about the upcoming hurricane season? There's a lot of interest in that and this possible El Nino that I know has been in the news. La Nina, El Nino, just a quick refresher there. La Nina is cooler than average sea surface temperatures across the equatorial Pacific Ocean. You can see that in the top image there. El Nino is the opposite, where you have warmer than normal sea surface temperatures across the equatorial Pacific. We are starting to see those warmer than normal sea surface temperatures emerge off of the western coast of South America, and the anticipation that will eventually spread or shift across the equatorial Pacific. That does have an impact on our weather downstream. I'll get to that in just a second. there's been talk about this being a very strong El Nino. This shows the probability of El Nino developing over the next several months as you head into the summer, fall, and even the winter timeframe. I'll note that La Nina and El Nino tend to have more impacts in the late fall and winter timeframe, so not a lot of signal during the summer. But these different shades of red indicate the probability of El Nino forming. That probability is very high. And then the different shades indicate how strong that could be. The fact that there's equal chances of it being a weak, moderate, or very strong is maybe we'll say alarming or interesting. There's a good chance that this could be a moderate to strong El Nino, and therefore having significant impacts on the downstream impacts from that. So just want to note high probability of El Nino developing by next winter or by the end of the summer, really. And the impacts there, Corey alluded to this earlier with the La Nina. During El Nino, the subtropical jet or that Pacific jet stream tends to shift south. Our storm track tends to be across the southern U.S. That's good for bringing us moisture. Sometimes it also tends to keep our temperatures down a little bit, but the impact really tends to be with bringing wetter conditions across the southern U.S. Again, that's on a seasonal time frame, so that's not individual heavy events or anything like that, just seasonally. It also has an impact potentially on the hurricane season. That jet stream brings more shear across the Atlantic basin and can suppress hurricane activity. That's just one piece of the puzzle when it comes to the hurricane outlooks. The NOAA hurricane outlook comes out in May. I know there's already been some companies and universities putting out their forecasts, and we've seen near normal to even below normal. A lot of that is leaning on that El Nino forecast that could suppress the overall activity. So that could, in turn, not give us as great a chance of getting a tropical system, which we probably need to help with this drought, but could also be a benefit to keeping us safe from a significant hurricane and also giving us maybe a wetter winter as we look forward. So with that, a quick summary. And I'm happy to take any questions because I know we got through this relatively quickly. Dry and hot the rest of this week. The pattern is turning favorable for some precipitation. That's good news next week. Would love to see some greater amounts there. There's no strong signal as we head towards the summer months. Even though we expect the El Nino to start to develop, those impacts and influences will probably be felt more in the hurricane season and next winter. And I just touched on those. I won't reiterate those. So again, thank you. I'll leave this up. Corey mentioned cocoa rods earlier, and I want to get a plug in for this. We desperately at times need rainfall reports, not just when it's raining, not just when it's flooding, but when we're in these dry situations. We don't have enough rainfall reports, and there are certain locations. These numbers here are the number of cocoa rods observers, which are public citizen observers in our area. This is probably true for the rest of the state. I know some of the other offices are listening in today and would love those cocoa rods observers as well. So again, just a plug here. It's a small commitment to get a rain gauge report every day. We really need these reports, especially in these very dry situations. So, Allison, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you so much for letting me talk today.
Thanks,
Right,
Barrett.
thanks, Barrett. Yeah, if I'll go ahead and bring my screen up quickly. Want to just make sure to thank our other speakers and also everybody here who stayed on a little bit longer. Plenty of content that we had to share with you. So I'll start to wrap us up here. We've heard a lot about so far the evolution of this drought and the impacts that it's having. Wanted to basically give us the bottom line. What are we looking at now? What does the near term and maybe the long term look like in getting through this drought? I think we have to start by acknowledging that this month has not been ideal for our weather and for our drought conditions. Thanks to our friends at the Southeast Regional Climate Center, we can see that we are on track for one of the warmest Aprils on record, and it is so far the warmest in places like Raleigh and Charlotte and Asheville. And if you've looked at the forecast over the next couple days, it's more upper 80s, more of that summer-like weather before the first front comes in this weekend. It is also on track to be at least one of the top 10 driest Aprils on record, and we see in the Triad, it's now the fourth driest. In Raleigh, it is actually on pace to be the driest April, only a tenth of an inch of rain there over the entire month. Obviously, that has helped that drought spread and intensify over these last few weeks. I noted that on our weekly drought calls, we've been relying heavily on the standardized precipitation index, and that right now that 90-day time scale really nicely represents the sort of impacts we're seeing because it is capturing that lack of recharge in the winter and the dryness and degradation so far this spring. This is not the only time scale, though, that we have this data available on. We can look at longer time scales that look even drier, and that could give us an indication of where we're headed if we don't get some better rain soon. If we add an extra dry month, basically going back to Christmas, this is the 120-day SPI. It is showing widespread extreme dryness and some pockets of exceptional dryness in parts of North Carolina. Again, there's no guarantee that we'll head in this direction, and we like to think the rainfall that's in the forecast over the next week or two would help to slow any degradation, but this is the trajectory that we're on now. Without rain soon, we would expect to see much more widespread dryness a month from now. So I'm going to present a couple different cases, a best case and a worst case, and I see this as the best reasonable case for what we can expect over the next few months. We do think, again, that precip over the next week is nice, but it's still below normal. We'll probably see some more degradation, but maybe that's as bad as it'll get. Maybe we'll see extreme drought expand to cover most of the state, but really not get a whole lot worse than that. And then looking at some of the other seasonal outlooks, including going out over the summer months, those start to shift toward maybe a little bit better precipitation chances for us. Maybe those events pan out, even if we're near normal, but especially if we're above normal for a few months, that might stop the bleeding and it might actually help us alleviate some of these drought impacts. On the other hand, what if the summer stays dry? And what if we even stay dry into the fall? Well, this is sort of that worst case that we're looking at. If you look back at where we were at this same point in the year in 2007, we had only just started to see the first areas of severe drought emerge in the far western corner of the state. Most of the state at this point in the spring was actually not in any drought category. We were only just getting into those first dry spells. Again, by comparison, we've been building up those rainfall deficits for months and months now. We're already seeing the widespread severe and extreme drought. If it were to stay dry, then that would just be a head start on the dryness and the impacts. Again, we're hopeful that this won't happen and that we will get better rain over these next few months, but I think we at least have to acknowledge that this is a possibility. If this dry weather continues, that we could potentially see a worse outcome. Now, one other thing I'll note, Barrett talked about the El Nino. That is a luxury that we did not have in 2007. At the end of that year, we headed into a La Nina, which was even drier over the winter, and that helped that drought continue on into the following spring. That had big impacts on the wildfire season, for instance. At least in this case, we feel like we can see some light at the end of the tunnel. If we get in that El Nino by late fall, early winter next year, that should help tamp down some of this drought and its severity. So let's talk about what this road to recovery would look like. If you've ever heard the old saying about how do you eat an elephant, the answer is one bite at a time. This is a big drought. It has been with us for a while, and we're not going to get rid of this drought and its impacts with one event or even in 1 month. Ideally, we would hope that what we're seeing over the next week is the start of a pattern change, where we'll at least start to get some more regular rain events. And even if we're not above normal every week, that could slow down some of the degradations that we've seen so far this month. Ideally, we would like to start seeing consistently at least 1 to 2 inches of rain per week. As Barrett talked about, this time of the year, we tend to average between 3/4 of an inch to an inch of rain every week. So we want at least to get that normal amount. An extra inch on top of that would be even better, and that would let us start chipping away at this drought and some of the ongoing impacts. Sometimes we say that the best cure for a drought is a good hurricane. As Barrett just shared, we may not be able to count on that, especially later in this hurricane season if activity winds down due to the El Nino. But I'll say that tropical impacts are not a requirement to getting rid of a drought. Back in 2008, that drought started to improve during the spring. Of course, we didn't have any hurricanes at that time of the year. It was just getting into a more regular, more favorable rainfall pattern. So again, we don't think we have to have a tropical storm, but that would certainly help to bring a big dose of rain. And then finally, again, we're looking toward the end of the year, maybe next winter, at a shift toward those more favorable large-scale patterns, like getting into an El Nino. If we can count on at least several months of wetter weather next winter, that would go a long way if we're still in drought then at improving those conditions. So I'm going to hand it back over to Allison. She's got a few final resources to share, and then we can open the floor for a few minutes for the Q&A.
Thanks so much, Corey. All right. So, first, the best place to check your local drought status is the DMAC website, and you can find that at ncdrought.org. This site will always show the latest statewide drought assessment, including a listing of the counties in each drought category and suggested response actions by those categories. Now, Jamie shared some details about the statewide fire weather situation and outlook. If you want to check your local fire danger, you can view our public-facing map at climate.ncsu.edu/fire. This includes forecasts for the next 7 days, along with links to other monitoring tools and resources that the fire service uses during active times like we're in now. Every week, our office also produces our weekly drought update infographics on behalf of the DMAC. These show the latest drought status, impacts observed across the state, and key takeaways about current conditions and recent changes. If you'd like to receive these every Thursday morning, then sign up for our listserv at go.ncsu.edu/drought list. Once per month, you will also receive a short range outlook, which are supported by the North Carolina Forest Service. Also, be sure to check out our popular climate blog. Corey writes it. It's excellent. On the blog, we tell the story of North Carolina's weather and climate, including monthly climate summaries, major event recaps, and seasonal outlooks. After today's webinar wraps up, that's where you'll be able to find a summary of this presentation as well. So take a look and make sure that you're subscribed to receive our blog post right in your email inbox. And finally, if you're hungry for more webinar content, then consider joining us next Monday afternoon at 2 o'clock for another presentation about new advances and research and tools for heat health planning. Experts from our office will share what's new with heat monitoring, including guidance to help you track the heat and stay safe from stress during this heat season. You can register for that at go.ncsu.edu/heat health research. All right. Now it's time for some questions. I know we had quite a few good questions that came through. So I wanted to start with Barrett. What do current conditions mean for flood risk when it finally does rain?
Yeah, that's tricky because there are different types of flood. Certainly, with our stream flows being as low as they are, river flooding is less likely because those streams will have to fill up after they've already, saturated soils and the base flow and all of that. Flash flooding, if you're concerned about flash flooding, is a different kind of a different animal there, where you certainly can still have your urban flooding, which isn't as impacted. And a lot of times around here, we remind our forecasters when we're looking at rainfall and worried about especially flash flooding, the drought can be exacerbated sometimes by the hard ground, and you can get more runoff and flash flooding. And also sometimes the rainfall rates can just overcome the fact that the soil is dry. So I think flash flooding is still a risk. That's still something that, we will take just as seriously, even in a drought when it comes to our thunderstorms. River flooding, I think the outlook is lower there just by the fact that we've got to fill up the water system and before we can get significant river flooding.
All right. Thank you. Now let's go over to Klaus. We see widespread severe drought across the state, and in some areas there are extreme drought. What are the parts of the state that you're keeping an eye on that we may be moving into exceptional drought soon?
I think as far as exceptional drought, probably the first area that comes to mind is east of Charlotte. I think it's Monroe. They've been falling behind even quicker than most of the state. So that would be the first place I think that we might see it. Out west, some of the indicators make it look like they're in kind of that exceptional level, but some of the other indicators and things we see don't suggest they're quite as bad as they may look. So yeah, probably east of Charlotte.
Great, thank you. And we'll have one last question as we wrap up. Corey, I'm going to put you on the spot for this one. I hope you can answer it. How much rain do you think we would need, and over what time frame, to alleviate drought conditions in the Catawba River Basin?
Yeah, this is another really tricky question. We looked at those rainfall deficits so far in this drought. We're seeing that Charlotte is something like 15 to 17 inches below normal since last August. But if the skies suddenly opened up tomorrow and dropped 17 inches on Charlotte, that would not end the drought. And that's because most of that moisture would run off. It would not have time to soak down into the ground. It would not reach our reservoirs or those deeper groundwater stores. And it would probably cause more flooding problems than anything. So that's why when we look at how much rain we need, it's really about the timing over which it occurs. And that's why we think seeing a couple inches of rain per week over the span of several months would really be ideal. And even then, if you were getting an extra inch of rain per week, knowing that we're 15 inches below normal, that could take 3 to 4 months to really get there. Now, the good news is that we would start seeing some improvements a lot sooner. Again, you look at those year-to-date deficits, Charlotte's something like 7 inches below normal. So if we started cutting the deficit in half, or even cutting 3 or 4 inches off the deficit, you would certainly notice that Lake Norman is starting to fill up, that your stream levels are recovering, and that the drought severity on the map every week would start to go down. So yeah, ideally we would like to get it nice and spread out an inch or two every week. We expect at some point this summer we'll probably get some heavier amounts, and we'll probably have some weeks that go by and we don't get as much. So wish Mother Nature was as reliable as we would hope.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for staying on an additional 20 minutes. We appreciate you. Take good care, everyone.
Thank you all.